So there I was flipping through my mail when I saw it. An official-looking envelope stamped with bold red letters. Eviction notice. Thing is, it wasn't for me. It was for my neighbor, Karen. The same woman who yells at kids for stepping on sidewalks and reports people for unsanctioned lawn chairs. She actually thought she could kick me out of my own house. But here's what she didn't know. That cute little cul-de-sac she's so proud of, I own it. Every inch of it, including her house. And what happened next? Let's just say Karen found out the hard way what real ownership looks like. Crescent Meadows was that rare suburb where every lawn was neatly trimmed, every mailbox perfectly aligned, and an unspoken code of conformity ruled the streets. The gated community exuded an air of pristine perfection maintained almost religiously by the local homeowners association. Every resident was expected to follow a strict set of guidelines, from the shade of the house paint to the precise placement of garden ornaments. In such a community, personal quirks were often seen as rebellious deviations. At the epicenter of this rigid order was Karen Miller, affectionately and infamously known as HOA Karen. In her early 50s and always impeccably dressed in conservative attire, Karen roamed Crescent Meadows with a clipboard and smartphone in hand. She patrolled the neighborhood relentlessly, ready to pounce on any homeowner who dared to stray from the approved way. Whether it was a wobbly lawn chair or an out-of-place decoration, Karen was there, issuing fines and making sure that everything stayed in line with the HOA's strict standards. To many residents, her presence was a constant reminder that conformity was the price of admission in Crescent Meadows. I, on the other hand, had long cherished the idea of independence. I grew up in the community, but I always walked a different path. Owning my own home was a point of pride for me, and I took great care to inject personality and creativity into every aspect of my life, even if it meant occasionally clashing with the HOA's draconian rules. My house was a blend of classic charm and personal expression, a living canvas that told the story of my dreams and my hard work. I believed that a home wasn't merely a structure to be maintained. It was a reflection of its owner's soul. Over the years, I had built a small empire within Crescent Meadows. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was also a savvy businessman with investments in local properties. And, as it turned out, I owned the very street, the entire cul-de-sac, and even Karen's house. This fact was known to only a few, kept as my secret card until the precise moment I needed to flip the script. While most residents meekly accepted the HOA's rules, I believe in the power of standing up for one's rights. I had always found a way to make my mark, even when the odds were stacked against me. The stage for our conflict was set against the backdrop of perfectly ordered manicured lawns and homogeneous, architecturally similar houses. In this neatly wrapped world, individuality was dangerous, and Karen was its fiercest adversary. It was no wonder, then, that when I received that eviction notice from Karen, it felt less like a bureaucratic error and more like a personal affront. My irritation wasn't just about losing access to my property. It was about having my very existence, my freedom of expression, challenged by someone who prided herself on enforcing conformity at any cost. I had endured countless fines and reprimands over the years for minor infractions, each one a petty attempt by the HOA and Karen to squelch any sign of deviance. But this time, Karen had taken a step further by trying to evict me from my own home, a move that seemed ludicrous in its audacity. Little did she know, the power dynamic in Crescent Meadows was about to shift dramatically. The eviction notice arrived one unremarkable afternoon, yet sent shockwaves through my carefully constructed world. As I flipped through the mundane pile of bills and generic mail, that one envelope, marked in bold red, leaped out at me. It wasn't addressed to me. Instead, it was from my neighbor, Karen, whose smug assertion that I was violating some elusive community standard was now etched in ink for all to see. My initial reaction was disbelief. How could Karen, of all people, believe that I was somehow failing to meet the requirements of our community? I had always followed my own rules, my creative designs, my nonconformist architecture, and yes, even my occasional flaunting of individuality with vibrant colors and quirky accents. But to Karen, every departure from the monotony was a threat. The eviction notice was not merely a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war, an attempt to assert her authority over my life. I immediately pulled out my digital dossier, a collection of photographs, scanned documents, and security footage that detailed my compliance with every regulation the HOA could possibly mandate. I had kept meticulous records of every fine, every warning, every complaint filed against me, and I was prepared to challenge them all. Karen had always been relentless, but now she had overstepped a line that I could not ignore. The eviction notice sparked a fire within me. I began reaching out to neighbors, collecting testimonials from those who, like me, had grown weary of Karen's arbitrary enforcement. I discovered that many shared my frustration. There were whispers and hushed conversations about how Karen's behavior wasn't an isolated obsession, but a systemic abuse of power. Social media in Crescent Meadows exploded with hashtags like #NoMoreKaren and #OurHomesAreRules, and I could sense that the community was ready for a change. As I compiled my evidence and marshaled my forces, I decided that my response had to be as bold as it was unexpected. I recalled a conversation with a friend who worked in real estate, who casually mentioned a little-known legal detail. In Crescent Meadows, the cul-de-sac, and even certain properties were privately owned and not subject to HOA control without explicit consent. A slow smile crept across my face as I realized that I held the ultimate trump card. I owned not only my home, but, in fact, the entire stretch of the cul-de-sac where Karen prided herself on enforcing her rules. And even more shockingly, I owned the very house that she claimed was in violation. That revelation set my mind in motion. Instead of cowering beneath Karen's petty fines, I would fight back. I began by drafting a formal, yet incendiary, response to the eviction notice. I cited property records and legal precedents that confirmed my undeniable ownership. I also prepared a statement for the community forum, explaining the absurdity of the situation and inviting my neighbors to see the truth for themselves. The digital petition I launched soon gathered momentum, with dozens, even hundreds, of signatures affirming that my property rights were non-negotiable. Karen, for her part, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beneath her meticulously curated facade. Her previous tactics, yelling at children, issuing fines for the smallest infractions, and demanding absolute conformity, had created an atmosphere of fear among those who dared to be different. I had watched in exasperation as she paraded around with a self-satisfied smirk, convinced that she was the arbiter of all that was proper in Crescent Meadows. One chilly evening, as the sky turned to deep indigo, I reviewed the latest entries in my digital dossier. The evidence was rock solid. Scanned copies of property deeds, digital maps of the cul-de-sac, and confirmed records all pointed to the same undeniable fact. Karen's eviction notice was not only baseless, it was laughable. I could almost hear the collective scoff of the community as the truth was laid bare, and that thought spurred me on to prepare for the ultimate confrontation. In the days that followed, tensions escalated. Karen's eviction notice became the flashpoint in a broader debate about individual property rights and the arbitrary power of the HOA. Neighbors began sharing stories of their own experiences with Karen's oppressive fines, and what had started as my personal battle was now a rallying cry. The digital petitions and social media posts painted a vivid picture of a community fed up with a single enforcer's tyranny. The stage was set for a showdown that would force the HOA board to reconsider its policies once and for all. The digital backlash to the eviction notice was explosive. Within hours of my initial post on the community forum, messages of support began flooding in from every corner of Crescent Meadows. Neighbors, previously cowed by the strict enforcement of Karen's rules, started to speak out. Videos of my response and digital copies of the property records were shared widely, accompanied by hashtags such as #OurHomesAreRules and #NotKarenSProperty. The tone of the conversations was defiant, an unmistakable declaration that individual rights would no longer be trampled by petty fines. Local bloggers, activists, and even legal experts began chiming in, analyzing the letter, the property records, and the legal intricacies of homeownership in our community. This is a textbook case of abuse of power, one well-known blogger tweeted, while another posted an article detailing how the HOA had no jurisdiction over a privately owned cul-de-sac. The digital narrative quickly transformed from a personal grievance into a community-wide call for reform. Residents organized impromptu meetings in their driveways, and online petitions demanding accountability for arbitrary fines accumulated thousands of signatures in just a few days. Karen, on the other hand, was visibly rattled. In a series of hastily recorded videos posted on her social media, she tried to justify the eviction notice as a necessary measure to maintain community standards. "It's for the greater good," she insisted, her tone a blend of panic and indignation. But every time she attempted to spin the narrative, the digital evidence, scans of property deeds, video testimonials from neighbors, and annotated maps, cut through her claims with the precision of cold, hard logic. The tension reached fever pitch when the HOA board called an emergency meeting to address the uproar. The boardroom was packed with residents demanding transparency and justice, and heated debates filled the air. I was invited to present my evidence in person, and I felt a surge of determination as I stepped up to speak. With calm clarity, I laid out the legal documents and property records that unequivocally demonstrated my ownership of not just my home, but the entire cul-de-sac, including Karen's house. Every piece of evidence was met with murmurs of approval from the assembled neighbors. Some wiped tears from their eyes, while others nodded in solemn understanding. As the meeting wore on, the board members found themselves torn between defending Karen and acknowledging the overwhelming evidence of abuse of power. The atmosphere grew electric with the realization that this was not merely a dispute over an eviction notice. It was a battle for the soul of Crescent Meadows. The digital petitions, the social media outcry, and the passionate testimonies formed a chorus too loud to ignore, and the board was forced to confront the possibility that Karen's actions had undermined the very principles of individual freedom and property rights that the community was meant to protect. In parallel, I continued to update my online community. I posted live streams of the HOA board meeting, shared behind-the-scenes footage of our impassioned discussions, and encouraged everyone to spread the word about the injustice. Every new comment, every shared post, and every signature on the digital petition strengthened the growing movement, an unstoppable force demanding accountability from an overzealous enforcer. The fervor of our collective voice was undeniable. If the board failed to act, it would mean the continuation of arbitrary enforcement, silencing creativity and individuality. The final crescendo came when the HOA board announced that a decisive public hearing would be held to determine the fate of the eviction notice and to re-examine the powers granted to enforcers like Karen. The news sent shockwaves through Crescent Meadows. On the morning of the hearing, residents poured into the community center, brandishing signs like "Our Homes, Our Rights," and "No More Karen." The palpable energy in the room was a testament to the determined spirit of a community that had finally decided to take back control. I arrived at the community center, my heart pounding with anticipation. I knew this moment would be a turning point, a watershed event that could redefine how our HOA operated. The digital dossier I had meticulously assembled was projected on a large screen for everyone to see. Each piece of evidence a testament to the truth that had been hidden beneath Karen's petty fines for so long. Every voice in the room rang out with a singular message. Our rights are not negotiable, and our community will no longer be dictated by the whims of an overzealous enforcer. The public outcry was overwhelming, and it was clear that the fate of not just my property rights, but the future of Crescent Meadows hung in the balance. The decisive moment arrived on a brisk morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Meadows Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of our neighborhood's enforcement policies. With unwavering presence and determination, Councilwoman Teresa Jenkins stepped up to the podium, her eyes shining with the hope and resolve of a community that had had enough. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed property records, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents. We have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Jenkins began, her voice resonant and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the eviction notice issued by Mrs. Karen Miller was not rooted in any legitimate concern for community order, but was instead an act of personal bias and an abuse of power. The very property rights that form the bedrock of Crescent Meadows have been violated. A heavy silence fell over the room as Jenkins continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that enabled such overreach. Additionally, we will implement new guidelines that unequivocally safeguard every resident's right to manage their own property and to express themselves without fear of arbitrary retribution. Today's decision is not merely about one eviction notice. It is a resounding declaration that our community will no longer tolerate the imposition of personal vendettas over our individual freedoms. Her words struck a resounding chord in the room, and murmurs of approval spread like wildfire. At that moment, a respected community advocate, a stalwart defender of individual property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice firm and passionate. "No one, not even HOA Karen, has the right to determine what is permissible on my property or in our community. Our homes, our land, and our creative expressions are not for sale to arbitrary fines." Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that Crescent Meadows values truth, justice, and the inalienable right to live freely. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every violation of our rights is met with decisive action. His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a potent call for change. Following his speech, a senior official from the local property oversight office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official documents that irrefutably demonstrated that I am the rightful owner of the entire cul-de-sac, including Karen's house. The evidence was overwhelming. Every scanned property deed, every annotated map, and every timestamped video clip confirmed that my ownership was absolute. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any abuse of power, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Jenkins concluded her address by saying, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Meadows, a community where individual rights are inviolable and public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, regardless of their self-appointed status, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the unyielding right to live and thrive on our own property. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our collective struggle against arbitrary rule. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a watershed moment that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Meadows. The days of petty fines and personal vendettas were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Crescent Meadows underwent a transformation that resonated far beyond the confines of our gated community. News of the rescinded eviction notice and sweeping reforms announced by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking fervent debates about property rights, individual freedoms, and the proper role of community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Meadows" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect our residents' rights. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #LiveFreeCrescent trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where creative expression and personal autonomy were treasured rather than suppressed. Neighbors who had long endured the oppressive weight of HOA mandates now spoke freely and proudly about their right to live on their own terms. Our homes, our land, our creativity, these are our inheritances, one impassioned resident declared at a crowded forum, his voice a clarion call for change. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Crescent Meadows would always value the individual spirit above all. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety agencies, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical governance, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were set up to ensure that every resident's rights were rigorously protected. Our duty is to serve and protect every homeowner's freedom, and we are committed to doing so with fairness and accountability, Lieutenant Reed asserted at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the new ethos that had taken root in our community. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns to empower residents and to raise awareness about the importance of standing up against bureaucratic overreach. When we join our voices, we create an unstoppable force for change, a local activist proclaimed during a vibrant town hall meeting, inspiring a wave of unity that swept over Crescent Meadows. For me, the battle, from the shock of that eviction notice to the triumphant reclaiming of my property rights, was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to challenge HOA Karen's arbitrary measures, to expose the truth about property ownership, and to fight for my right to live creatively had sparked a movement that resonated throughout our community. Neighbors, once too fearful to speak out, now shared their stories of resistance and rejoiced in the victory of collective action. The digital evidence that once served as a weapon against me had become the beacon that guided our struggle for justice. Karen Miller, once the imposing enforcer of outdated rules, was now a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community unites in defense of its freedoms. Her influence waned as digital records of her transgressions circulated widely, and her reign of petty fines was consigned to the past. Crescent Meadows had reawakened to the truth that individual rights, creative expression, and the freedom to shape one's own environment were priceless. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Meadows, residents, local officials, and advocates gathered beneath the orange glow of a setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not just the victory over arbitrary enforcement, Councilwoman Jenkins proclaimed with fervor, but also the triumph of our collective spirit. We are a community that values truth and the right to live as we choose. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our unified commitment to protect our freedoms. As each day dawned over Crescent Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured, a beacon of transformative change and a tribute to the power of community. The story of how HOA Karen served me an eviction notice, only to learn that her home was part of my property, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that creativity, independence, and the right to own one's space were inalienable. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Crescent Meadows, truth, justice, and individual freedom would always prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined than ever to safeguard our rights against any form of arbitrary interference. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Meadows would forever be a place where freedom, creativity, and respect for individual property are cherished above all else.